Peyton Thorne was, of course, the talk for the two of us much of the offseason going back 1 year ago. Had one very successful season at Michigan State. Critics may point to the ground game supporting him. He's a mobile quarterback, did not have a strong season at Auburn. Of course, the passing attack was one of the worst in the conference, probably the worst in the conference statistically off the top of my head. Your thoughts about, of course, with the transfer portal, fans are always thinking, hey, let's just get to the transfer portal and we can solve all our problems.
And these are also the same fans that lament about the transfer portal and NIL, but are the first ones to beg for a transfer portal quarterback. This is a big topic in Auburn football right now, as has been the case for the last several years. I would love for us to not have a offseason where we're asking the question, is the grass greener on the other side? I do, before we get into that, I want to give you credit, Mark, for really pitching to me early on when Peyton Thorne was brought in. Pay attention to his mobility. I didn't give him a lot of credit. And, I went back and looked at some of the film, as you suggested I do, to see that he was a little bit more mobile than people gave him credit for. We saw that this year at Auburn. There were times that he basically put the team on his back with his feet at the quarterback position too, and really got the offense going when it wasn't going in any other way. So I was shocked by that, and you proved to be 100% correct on that. And I give you a lot of credit in our live streams for opening my eyes to that personally. Peyton Thorne did not have a great year overall. That is not something I'm going to shy away from. I think it was very underwhelming. I think it lacked a lot of continuity, but I think it was a bigger problem, as I've talked about over the last several seasons and years with you. Auburn's issue on offense is much bigger than the quarterback. It is an offensive line problem, and it is very much a wide receiver problem too. So many balls were dropped that hit, the wide receivers square in the hands. I'm not talking about they got like one hand on it and had to bring it down. Square in the hands, just dropped. Offensive line, maybe it improved a little bit this year. I think that's fair to say, but not the way we need it to be. Protection was lacking a lot of the time for any quarterback, even a Robbie Ashford, who's even more mobile than Peyton Thorne. So what you look at here is you see Auburn fans being desperate for a better looking offense. And when you don't see that in year one, some people get a little bit antsy about the situation and convince themselves that the next person in the transfer portal is going to be the guy. Well, I submit to you, that's what they said about Robbie Ashford. That's what they said about TJ Finley. And that's what they said about Bo Nix. And Bo Nix was great, but Bo Nix suffered under an offense that didn't give him a lot of support. Same thing for TJ, same thing for Robbie. So it's really just a big conversation, Mark, that unfortunately I kind of get a little bit tired of because to me, Peyton Thorne's the guy until proven otherwise, or a player enters from the transfer portal, which doesn't seem to be happening at this moment.
I also look at it from a bigger perspective in regards to the conversations we have on our channel concerning conference strength. Of course, the SEC has been the best conference in college football as the Big Ten caught up to the SEC. Well, the Big Ten has certainly been the second best conference in college football for most of that time that the SEC has been the best. And now you have these additions to both conferences, and it's just it's a mega war to a certain extent. But the reason I bring that up is because a guy like Peyton Thorne, who was moderately successful in the Big Ten, again, had one big season with the help of one of the best running backs in college football, and one magical season, 11-2, they win the Peach Bowl. The rest of his career, not quite to that level. And then he falters in the SEC. And just to look at his numbers, I'm looking at his game-by-game numbers, and they were pretty bad down the stretch, in particular against Bama, the bowl game against, of course, a Maryland defense that he largely has faced at Michigan State. And then I think of somebody like a Graham Mertz, who leaves Wisconsin, where he struggled mightily. He goes to Florida, throws 20 TDs with 3 picks, and leads the conference in completion percentage. So it's a lot about scheme and relationships and personnel around that particular player and how it just works or fits. And it just didn't for Peyton Thorne. Maybe it could in 2024, but he's better than what he showed last year.
Oh, I 100% agree with that. And I'm going to use our rival as an example of this. had some great quarterbacks. Alabama has over the last several years. But what you've seen transpire, and I know this is an apple and orange comparison a little bit here, I acknowledge that, but you see a lot of the times when they're not surrounded by that great talent, like when they go to the NFL and they're on the lesser teams and such, your Mac Jones and things like that, they struggle. And unless they're just an amazing freak athlete like a Tua and Jalen Hurts to some extent, even though technically he's Oklahoma now, it's all about who you surround yourself with as a quarterback most of the time. Yes, the quarterback is the most important position on the offense, on the field, frankly, as usually the leader of the team, but you got to have a great supporting cast. Alabama is an example of that, has proven that. Auburn is an example of the opposite. They have not provided a lot of support, not from a lack of trying, but it just hasn't worked. Whether that support is scheme, personnel on the offensive line, wide receivers. Some of that seems to be getting fixed right now. Everybody's very excited about this wide receiver group that's coming in this season. Very young players, but a lot of them, such as a Cam Coleman, have a lot of promise in terms of size and measurables, which Hugh Freeze really likes in wide receivers. But you've also got a young and a little bit more experienced group of linemen that have been brought up before Hugh got there, but also now that he's kind of helped solidify. So my hope is this year that whether we're talking about Peyton Thorne or somebody else, if a transfer portal comes in, or one of the guys that's currently there at Auburn wins out the job, this is a bigger conversation for Auburn at quarterback than just Peyton Thorne. It's about fixing this offense completely holistically, because without that, Peyton Thorne will struggle. Holden Garner will struggle. Hank Brown, Walker White, all those names. It's a much bigger problem than just the quarterback for Auburn.
I would also think, even though there will be a name or two out there after spring practice, that if Auburn was going to go full throttle into the transfer portal for a quarterback, that they might have done that after the regular season, because there was the biggest lot of quarterbacks that we've ever seen in the transfer portal. You know, we're talking Power 5 starting quarterbacks, 12 to 15 of them were out there for the taking.
Yeah, I agree. I think did conversations happen? I'm sure you'd be stupid not to entertain interest, to ask questions, to reach out to quarterbacks that might want to come in, because if you're not doing that, you're going to fall behind. But that just because you go and search for that opportunity doesn't mean that you're still not convinced you're better served with who's here right now. Bringing it all back to Peyton Thorne here. I see the value in Peyton Thorne at quarterback. And I really hope that this year we can combine what I was pleasantly surprised with his mobility, with what I've seen at Auburn, at Michigan State, and at what he can be as a passer too. And I think we could have a surprising good year behind him if that support is there for him.
Now, there's another guy whom Auburn fans hope will one day have a big reputation and a positive legacy at Auburn, and that would be DJ Durkin, the new defensive coordinator, who has a long resume of major jobs at places like Florida, Michigan, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, and the head coach at Maryland for 3 seasons. So he certainly has a wealth of big-time experience, and he is now the selection to take over.
Hugh Freeze even said that he took a long time making this decision. I think he was quoted yesterday by one reporter that he and our athletic director spoke at length about how this search was going to go. He wanted to take his time with it, really get this one right. And I think that's kind of the prevailing sentiment with whatever decision we're talking about for Hugh Freeze in this upcoming year and leading up to it, is getting this right. You had year one. It's time to really start getting things going in the right direction at this point. And I think that's why you see the decision to bring in DJ Durkin, who has, as you said, a lot of experience, a lot of respect football wise. There is the controversy around DJ Durkin at Maryland, and don't really want to delve into the details of that here. You can go look that up for yourself, but there is some, personal issues that some people have with him. And I think that's a legitimate conversation to have. I don't think there should be an over focus on it, but it's one of those things, as you would look at any coaching stint out there. Nobody's perfect. Everybody's had baggage. And I'm not trying to dismiss any way what occurred at Maryland. I mean, that's a big deal, but second chances are a great thing. And we've all been given second chances. So my take on has been on this. A lot of accountability and oversight is required of anybody, but especially in these scenarios. But when you look at the resume, you look at the recruiting prowess, you look at scheme, I think it really lines up a lot with Auburn's identity of being a aggressive defense historically, maybe not so much over the last couple of seasons, but historically, this fits really well. And when I hear Hugh Freeze say, I took my time with this to try to get this as right as possible, yeah, there's a little bit of a risk with it. But frankly, the more I think about it, the more I talk with people about it, the more I like this hire at DC.
Not to dismiss again and discount taking past issues seriously, but there's also a different vetting process if you're talking about a head coach
Yep.
who's leading the program, setting the direction, versus someone who is in line with the rest of the program and is subservient in a hierarchy below the head coach. Those standards, to me, are much different in regards to evaluating and vetting out the past. Again, not that it's not important, but it's just a different evaluation.
Absolutely. And look, this guy was vetted out. There were questions. If you think that in the process of hiring that wasn't brought up, tell me what happened. Tell me how you changed. Tell me what we're going to do differently here. What's going to be put in place to make sure something like this never happens again. If you're not, based in the reality that happened, then you're just not being honest. So, like you said, not dismissing it, but understanding that there's been a vetting process in this. But I just go back to, especially for recruiting side of things, Hugh Freeze had to go whole stock into recruiting this offseason. Some would say, and if you read some of his comments, that maybe he'd put a little bit too much focus on that and sacrificed a little bit of the production out in the field. I think that's a little hyperbolic, but the same token, you can kind of see and look how well recruiting went in his first, few months and leading up to this first full class. And you can see now, okay, it's time to focus on the field. How do I, as the head coach, as the CEO in this growing business of college football, take a little bit of that off of me so I can get the on the field stuff going in the right direction, because it needs to at this point. You hire guys like DJ Durkin. You hire guys like Derek Nix, the new offensive coordinator too from Ole Miss, and several others. Wesley McGriff he went to Texas A&M for like 2 weeks and came back. So he has assembled a staff with DJ Durkin that I think is going to really help him in those recruiting realm that he's had to kind of take on fully himself this past year.
His most recent stop at Texas A&M for the last 2 seasons, and while somebody may say, well, that was a disappointing run under Jimbo Fisher, they disappointed in regards to wins and losses. They did field one of the best defenses in the SEC, and certainly up front in particular. And then the counter to that might be, well, they recruited out of their minds and anybody could field a great defense. But to your point, he, of course, had a big play and a big part in that recruiting process.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought up the Texas A&M thing, because I think that's what's missed here. A lot of people will associate, look how bad Texas A&M did. Why would you hire somebody from there that did so poorly? Well, if you really look at it, it was more of an offensive problem than a defensive problem. I'm gonna read off a list I have here in front of me, because I was discussing this with a friend, and he really put it into perspective for me. And this is statistics at the time he sent them to me. Texas A&M last year in the SEC, third in points allowed, first in total yards allowed, second in passing yards allowed, first in rushing yards allowed, and first in sacks. To me, when you look at those stats alone in the SEC, and if you compare them to college football in general, you're going to see that he's in the top 25 in a lot of categories there too. So it makes sense in terms of making an upgrade at the defensive coordinator position, how his defense have performed recently, historically. It makes sense recruiting wise. Yes, acknowledging the past issues. The risk is worth the reward in my book.